Welcome to episode 8 of our year-long partnership with CSCS. Coming to the end of the year, and it is flown by Sean Cullen, CEO of CS, back in the studio, and we have another guest for this episode. Her name is Emma Scott, and we've reduced your title, haven't we, because it was quite long. Director of Vocational Qualifications at Ofqual. Emma, welcome, and Sean, good to have you back.
Okay, great for that.
So let's get straight into this one. Fraud. We've talked about this quite a lot the last 7 episodes, but this one we're going to look at qualification fraud. 4 sections. So we're going to break this down. The first one being kind of setting the scene, the roles, responsibilities. So Sean, for listeners who are going to be new to this, any apprentices, someone coming into the industry, what is CSCS's role within the construction industry? But more importantly, what sits outside of your remit?
Yeah, so as we've said in previous episodes, our role is to check and verify the qualification and the health and safety test, and therefore issue a card against it. So in that, we end up checking qualifications in whatever form they come through. What we are not is the body that undertakes the training or the awarding organisation that's delivering the training. Or settings that.
We've said it a few times, but it's good that we reiterate because people still associate with CSCS with that. But
yeah, so all we do is card the output.
Yeah. Emma, let's bring Ofqual into the picture. So where do you guys fit within the construction qualifications landscape? And what are your responsibilities when it comes to ensuring qualification delivery standards?
So, of course, the regulator of qualifications and assessments in England. And so we regulate some of the qualifications that can be used to secure a CSCS card. The awarding organisations that we regulate have to work within a regulatory framework that we set. And that regulatory framework ensures that they deliver qualifications that are valid and reliable and can be authenticated. As part of that work, we've been working with partners like CSCS and CITB and the Building Safety Regulator, looking at how we can combat qualification fraud in the construction sector in particular. And through that, we have published our own qualification fraud prevention plan. And within that, advice note for an awarding organisation that sets out some of the reasonable steps we think they could take if they are going to take seriously their work to prevent fraud in these qualifications.
The good thing is we've got some good questions from viewers right at the end. So if you haven't seen any of these episodes before, at the end, I read out viewers' questions, and I think we've got 3 for episode 8, so they'll be at the end. Sean, what does it mean for a CSCS card holder to hold an Ofqual regulated qualification? And why do you think that connection is so important?
So as Emma said, the importance of holding a qualification that is sat within the regulated framework, that the standard is consistently applied, that the awarding organisation that is issuing that qualification has accountability. So therefore, for me, holding that award, it's the same as you holding the same award that's been we've studied in a different place. It would have been delivered to the same standard, and therefore the award is comparable no matter where within England it's been issued.
Right, Emma, let's get on to qualification fraud. How do you define it? Let's put it in layman's terms. How would you define qualification fraud?
Yeah, so qualification fraud basically is a qualification that's achieved by someone through illegitimate ways, and they haven't done it legitimately through the proper training and through the proper routes. So essentially it's a type of malpractice, but it's a more serious type because it's for personal gain.
What does it look like? Where do you see it? Where does it occur? Is it getting worse? We talked before we started recording about this, but...
So it can permeate in many ways. It's not a widespread issue. It is quite a tight issue. But whenever it does emerge, it's obviously a serious issue, and so that's why we want to tackle it. It can happen at the individual level. So it can be an individual who just seeks out a fake certificate that they can use to try and put forward to secure a CSCS card, or it could be that they pay someone to sit the exam on their behalf. Or it could be that they collude with another learner to share answers and try and do the best on the exam as they can that way. And then on the other side of things, it could be that there are particular training providers who are incentivized or coerced into helping learners get through their course quickly through fast-track training, or through providing learners with the answers that they need for the assessments, or falsifying the results for them in the event that they can get a result that they need to get the certificate.
It's quite a lot then. Obviously, with my residential background, a lot of that is news to me, but I didn't realise. And Sean, you said it's there. It's not huge, but
Yeah,
it's still going on in this day and age with digital and smart check and everything else.
yeah. So it's as Emma said, it's not wide scale, but the impact is if you've got one person on your site that has a valid certificate that they've obtained fraudulently, and they're undertaking the work, they're potentially making the workers on the remainder of the site unsafe, because they won't have the knowledge and experience that others that hold that qualification would have. All that previous information that would have been through a legitimate course has been shortcut.
We've got a good question on that, actually. Just at the end of understanding this, sure, we've heard some of this activity is obviously well organised. Before we started recording, we had a good chat about it. There's an organised crime dimension to this that the industry should be aware of. I suppose the best question is, how do we inform the industry that this is out there? Yeah. And the bottom line is, don't go near it.
Yeah. So I think the key message for me is it's the average worker has legitimate qualifications, legitimate skills, come to work to do exactly what they're employed to do. However, unfortunately, organised crime permeates not just our industry, but other industries, and by its definition, it's organised. And the reason why they're trying to get individuals illegitimate qualifications and therefore a card in order to access site is so that they can earn off the back of those individuals. And therefore, what we as an industry need to be cognizant of is that unfortunately it does happen, and therefore in order to make sure that we're keeping everybody on site safe, we need to be making regular checks, because where we then identify, the site might identify through obvious competency, this individual is on site as with a skilled bricklayer qualification that doesn't seem to have a clue, needs to be called out. We then look at that qualification that they had in order to obtain the card, and we'll then start that process as to whether that's a one-off, as Emma just said, that might have been a one-off collusion, or whether there's an organised process behind it, which has led to potentially a training centre being infiltrated because of an organised crime element. That we won't then run that investigation process. We'll be handing over to others to then go through that due process. But what we will end up doing is revoking the card and potentially other cards associated from that training centre.
Well, one thing I've done is a lot more organised than I gave it credit for. And I think the third section of 4, detection accountability. I think this is important, obviously, how we can start finding out about this. So, Emma, what systems or processes have Ofqual got in place to detect this in terms of malpractice, fraudulent activity across the network, and what standards should they be following?
Yeah, so we have requirements on awarding organisations that they have to do their own fraud risk assessments. They have to ensure that the qualifications that they're offering, that they've looked at them and thought about the context that they're offering them in, the risks that might pose to those qualifications and to the results, and the incentives that might be out there in the market to circumvent any of their rules. In our fraud prevention advice note that we've issued, one of our expectations is that awarding organisations should be thinking up front about how to design out opportunities for fraud. So thinking about how they ensure that the qualification structure and the assessment methods mean that they can be confident that they're going to be undertaken in a way that isn't fraudulent. We also have requirements that awarding organisations should identify fraud wherever possible, which could be through reports from centres or from other learners or from whistleblowers, and where they get those reports that they investigate them and that they take action promptly when they find that malpractice or fraud has taken place. In addition to that, then, we as a regulator collect data from awarding organisations, and we also work with other stakeholders to share information and intelligence. And we use that to feed that back to the sector and also to ensure that other stakeholders in the sector are able to use their own levers as appropriate to tackle the different types of fraud that we might identify.
So ultimately, what action can you take and what powers have you got around this criminal activity in this going?
So we haven't got direct prosecution powers, but we do have powers to take enforcement action against awarding organisations if we think that they haven't done enough when they've been investigating or detecting malpractice. And we also have good links with enforcement agencies and other regulators, so we can share intelligence with other government agencies, with other sector bodies, and with enforcement agencies in order that they can take forward and take cases forward with their own regulatory levers.
So going off script a little bit, what fascinated me talking before was I just thought there was a few dodgy cards being chucked about. But actually, Sean, you mentioned that there's links to passports and driving licenses, and there's me just thinking it's a couple of blokes in the shed knocking out some dodgy cards. But actually, fascinatingly, it's a bigger picture.
Yeah, and as we said off air, most of those adverts. So you'll see on Facebook and
One I got this morning on Instagram
and Instagram, social media. We do not advertise on Facebook and Instagram. So anything that's on there advertising CSCS card is illegitimate. In probably 90% of those cases, they'll take your money. You'll get no product. So
you don't even get a card.
No. So there is no card. So whilst and then of course they close that Facebook page down, and they'll open up another one, and they'll scam somewhere else. So it's a scam, not a fake process. However, some of them do then end up as a a fake qualification as part of it. But in most of the Facebook pages and Instagram and other social media sites that we're constantly monitoring and taking down, it's not just our card that's on there. There'll be a driving license, how to obtain your driving license, how to obtain your passport, how to obtain something else that gets you an ID into somewhere. And therefore, if there's a market for it and a black market for it, and there's a market for the use, which in our case, obviously, the CSCS card has a legitimate market for access to site, and therefore, I guess the question to the viewer and the construction worker is, it is a bit of a mug's game obtaining a card illegitimately, because as we'll cover later, if we're using smart check, which is what industry is using as a check, it won't validate. So therefore, you won't then get on site. You'd have paid hundreds of pounds for that card instead of 30, and you will have therefore effectively been scammed out of a legitimate product.
Rather than wait for all the questions at the end, there's one that I've got to ask now because it links perfectly into that. The last one I got sent was, if I have an accident on the site and don't have the correct cards, I basically presume that's a scam card or a fraudulent one, do I get in trouble?
Yeah, potentially. It'll be down to the site and the site rules. But yeah, if the site is a carding site, and you're on site with the wrong card for the job you're doing on site, you're the one carrying the liability. Yeah.
So if you are watching thinking it's going to save a few quid or a bit of time trying to get a hooky card and qualification, it's just not worth it. the reality is plant, tools, working for all the stuff that's going on, it's not just you're putting everyone else at risk. So don't even think about it.
And it's not, there may be building failure as a consequence, but the real consequence is human.
Yeah.
It's the consequence and the risk you place on the other legitimate workers on site that understand. Construction sites are unsafe in part, and therefore you have to understand the processes in moving around and accessing and delivering your trade within that site in order to keep you and everybody else on site safe.
That's important, isn't it? So, Sean, holding one of these cards requires the applicant to achieve a valid, emphasise that word, qualification. When the qualification fraud occurs, it happens during the assessment stage, not when the card is issued. So can you explain why CSCS isn't in a position to detect or prevent this type of fraud?
Yeah.
So again, let's get that clear, because it...
Yeah. So as I said at the top, we all we do is card. So we card at the end of the process. That assessment process will sit with the either the training provider or the awarding organisation in the way the qualification is delivered. So it's outside of both mine and Emma's direct control, but Emma's got regulatory powers around those organisations following process. So that's assessment cheating that might occur. Means that they may be issued with a legitimate certificate. And therefore they present to us as part of application a legitimate certificate. We're then issuing a card on the basis of that, but from investigations that may come via Ofqual or the organisation or the training provider themselves, that then identifies that certificate was illegitimately gained, means that we would then revoke. And I think I've mentioned I can't remember which episode it was, when we were talking about card fraud early on, and I think I said probably 10 years ago, the processes around our issuance of card, unfortunately, we had less API back-end checking of qualification certificates to the awarding organisation. So a lot of it was manually checked and processed. And we didn't have the same level of sophistication we have now in cooperation between agencies. So for every card that we issued that might have a fraudulent qualification associated with it, whether a legitimate certificate or indeed a very good fake, and there are still plenty of those out there. For every card that got issued that may then have been revoked somewhere down the line because those fraudulent actions came to light, 9 in 10 of those now we're picking up at the application stage. So the fake certificate, the legitimate certificate with a non-verifiable certificate number will not get authenticated at the front end. So the question will be asked and we won't issue a card.
So even though we're taking big strides forward, what more can we do you think, Em? Working together, digital.
Yeah, I think there's
that last bit out, I suppose.
I think there are further improvements that can be made to the verification of certificates and digitalisation of certificates, although that introduces different risks, of course. But as Sean says, there are already measures in place and controls and checks and balances that, if used appropriately, could mean that the system strengthens. So if people are checking that those certificates are valid and that every awarding organisation has a website that you can go to where you can verify the certificate number and check that the person holding it is the person that achieved it. So if those checks are taking place, then that's a step forward. And then also the information we're collecting from awarding organisations and from other other sectors and also looking across sectors. So our fraud prevention work doesn't stop at construction. It's also looking at security and visas and nail and hair and a range of other sectors where we're seeing similar types of fraud. We're able to share that intelligence because none of this happens in a silo. So, this fraudulent activity isn't just targeting construction. It'll often be targeting other sectors too. And because we can share that intelligence, and we're in a better position now to share that intelligence, that means that we can ensure that lessons we're learning from one sector, we're taking across to another. And where we find issues with training providers, we can share that information as well and make sure that if it looks like that training provider is involved in fraudulent activity for one sector, it's more than likely involved in it for other sectors too.
Wow.
And we see also that where rewarding organisations, so as Sean said, neither us or CSCS have any direct regulation of the training providers themselves, but the awarding organisations do have third-party agreements with those training providers. And so we would expect that those agreements are enforceable and that the awarding organisation can do something about a centre that is not working in the way that they expect by removing their approval and shutting them down effectively. But what we see then is those centres just moving on and opening up again. We call them Phoenix centres, where they open up, the same people just move to a new location and open up with a new name. But we're actually doing work now with other government agencies like Companies House and their new powers to ensure that we're able to also look at how we can verify the individuals that work in those centres and see whether these are Phoenix centres or whether these are legitimately new centres.
And actually, you mentioned Companies House. Companies House brought in new director registrations last month. In terms of, isn't it the deadline? Yeah. So you've got to now be electronically registered, and by doing that verification, I was reading this morning about 15% less applications and registrations of new limited companies as a consequence, and significant reduction in overseas registered companies since that particular additional check has been put in for companies directors, which I think is an absolute positive, because that phoenixing is what we've experienced. I've experienced across other sectors, and we've referred to it using another term in terms of what happens on Facebook at the low level in terms of whack-a-mole. We seem to close that one down and it reopens. From a training perspective, that phoenixing of businesses is a potential perennial issue, which I think the multi-agency approach, particularly the governmental organisations now that have put in place a substantive change that I hope will help call those to task.
I suppose the way I look at it from the outside in, it's when there is a fatality and it boils down to someone doing something they shouldn't have been doing because they weren't qualified or qualified in the right way. It's
and that's what we come back to all the time. We want to be able to check and verify that the person is who they say they are with the skills they say they have, so they can get onto site legitimately, because we need talent operating within construction
in a safe environment.
But we want them to be safe, and therefore we want that 1%. It's not. We're not talking, major percentage, but that 1% is what potentially leads to fatality. We want to remove that.
Yeah. So finally, advice, which is obviously, I think a lot of people can take away. I think let's just reiterate, anything on Facebook or Instagram saying CSCS, click here, whatever it says, ignore. You haven't even got a page, have you?
No, we haven't got a page. Report it to us. So we're likely to be picking up, but please report it, because we've got action in the background that we're taking.
And as you say, it might be across border aspects such as advice. It's mad. I find it, another level. So, Sean, practical steps employers can take to protect themselves against this fraud. when checking their workers' credentials, etc.
Yeah. So as I said, the legitimate card we will have issued against all of the certification checks that we put in place. The best thing for you as the employer to do is to check regularly using SmartCheck, because if the card is valid, it will validate through SmartCheck. If it doesn't validate through SmartCheck, there might be a technical problem with the card. That there is a possibility with that. However, there's also the risk that it's a fraudulently obtained card, or we've revoked it because of fraudulent activity. So therefore, if it checks, use it, and accept the individual on site. If it doesn't check, report it, and that individual needs to get a new card.
Just to be clear, no matter how good the fraud card is, it will not get through SmartCheck.
No. We've had, we did SmartCheck 3 episodes ago. So an update, I was looking at the data yesterday. We've had 34 million reads on SmartCheck in 2025 alone. 1.4 million of those reads failed. Now, more than half of those failures was because there was a tech read issue. So the card might have been okay, but it meant it needs to be represented and rechecked. And there are other website checking tool to go back to. And then the next time it was checked that same day, it validated. So, but we've had 1.4 million failed reads. A proportion of those are invalid cards and revoked cards.
Still a big number, isn't it?
Yeah.
Emma, what practical steps should awarding organisations and training centres take to protect themselves against this qualification fraud?
So I think the best thing awarding organisations can do is to conduct frequent risk assessments about their qualifications, risk assess their centres and training providers, and make sure that they haven't got any new intelligence about them that suggests that they should monitor them differently. And to Sean's point, I think employers and people on site should also feel confident about reporting people that they think potentially don't have the skills that they think they need in order, that they should be demonstrating given the qualifications that they purport to hold. So if that intelligence can go back through CSCS and back to awarding organisations, that helps the kind of detection of fraud on an ongoing basis, but also means that awarding organisations can look back at certificates issued previously and check that they were issued legitimately and revoke them if not, which means then CSCS would get notification that they may need to relook at some of the cards that they've issued as well on that basis.
And Sean, qualification fraud isn't the only challenge. What other types are you seeing?
Well, we covered some of it. We're seeing that that fraudulent actor who's trying to spoof you advertising. It's not a card. It's not. They're not giving you a qualification. They're just giving you a route to get a card. They're taking the money. They're giving you nothing back. So that's what we see all the time on Facebook and Instagram and other social media. We also see the fake card. So the individual hasn't needed to present a fake qualification because they've just gone straight to the fake plastic. But as I've just said, that fake plastic won't validate in SmartCheck. That's why they've gone more organised to ensuring that there's a legitimate certificate, because they've realised that we do that certificate check.
Just before we did a question earlier, 2 left before we come to them. Emma, any message you want to put out to the audience? Construction, something maybe new for next year, or what to look out for, a bit of advice? Or do you think we've pretty much covered everything?
I think from our perspective, it is, if you see anything that you don't think looks right, you should feel confident in speaking up and reporting it, because intelligence is the best way to tackle qualification fraud. We'll never find it through just proactive detection, because as we've talked previously, all aspects of it are quite whack-a-mole. You know, like as soon as controls are tightened in one area, they just move on to something else and look for other ways in. So the best defence we have is to be quite open about calling out anyone that we think looks like they don't have the skills they need to hold the qualification that they say they hold.
Sean, anything to add?
Only that we're talking about fraud and the risk. It's the reputational risk. It's the site risk that we're trying to help to mitigate. It's less than 1% of our cards, as I've just indicated in the number of successful reads this year. But we don't want anybody on site that does not have the legitimate skills to be on site, and therefore we continue to work with industry and employers to minimise that risk for them.
I think just to wrap up from me before we do the questions, from my background, being on the tools, yes, it's a quick way in. Yes, it's a cheap way in. It might have to save a bit of time and money, but actually you're putting not just yourself at risk, but you're putting the whole site at risk. And heaven forbid anything happened, you're the one that's got that responsibility. So it's not a question of grasping your mates in, but you know, we talked about it. Working at height, cranes, plant, power tools. You know, just think twice before even being tempted with this. Right, a couple of quick questions. I get loads of these scammers messaging me for these cards. How will anyone know if I get one rather than a legit one? I think we've already covered that, but
well, we have in that scenario. I think it's more likely to be the scam. So they'll take your money. You won't even see a card. If you do get a card, it won't be a valid one, so it won't therefore check on SmartCheck.
And final one, that there's still loads of sites letting anyone in. What's the point of me getting a card?
Right, so sites where they're not checking, or sites where they're checking and then they've got the wrong card?
No, this because a couple of people I've spoken to on the phone about this. If a site is short of bricking, spreads, whatever, they're like, look, I know a gang of 7, but there's only 2 or 3 with cards. Get them in.
Right. So that's a site taking the risk under building safety regulation. The expectation is that they've got skilled and competent individuals, and the employer has the duty to report that they have the skilled individuals. More and more expectation is that the card is the only identifier within industry for you and I. There's multiple identifiers and multiple schemes to identify our employer, but the only identifier for us working for that employer with an element of validity with the checks in the background are the CSCS card processors. That's the reason why the other 5 might get onto site. In an issue on site, that employer's got no comeback in terms of the skills and competency.
Almost do it. Be proud of the card you got. Well, it's issues. So brought this episode to an end. The final one. Sean, next one is episode 9. And what we're doing is a recap. I haven't told Sean yet, but we've got the questions and we're going to do like a quick fire round. So I'm just going to fire all these questions that we've got here at him and just kind of put him on the spot. But obviously, you know, we've been through a lot of this, but I think it's a good thing to really recap everything we've been through the last 12 months, and any questions that you may have missed, we will be answering them for you in episode 9, the final one.